Good evening, brothers and sisters, ladies and gentlemen. This is Pastor Larry Camp of the Bethlehem Baptist Church, affectionately known as the Bethlehem Nation. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Insight. Insight is a program designed to get insightful information from insightful minds. So we're thanking God for another evening to do that. I want to first thank our staff, the Reverend Derek Jackson, who was the co-pastor of the Bethlehem Nation, Deacon Linda Atkinson Kendall, who serves as my administrative assistant and a very good one at that, Deaconess Asia Camp Jackson, and certainly Sister Niger Elizabeth Camp, who have all served to be a part of this wonderful platform that we have. Now, before I present my guests, I also want to say, brothers and sisters, for the months of July and August, we will not be on, but of course there will be reruns throughout the whole course of those 2 months. And of course, during that 2-month period, then we meet with the staff to go over some various things in which how we can improve on things. So my guest tonight, listen, I'm just honored to have my guest tonight in the person of Reverend Roger Williams, the pastor of the First Baptist Church of Glen, Cove, and who hosts one of the great platforms called Think About It. I have been privileged to look at it and to be a part of it on 2 occasions. And Pastor Williams is, and I say this very truthfully. I do not say this as an embellishment. I say this as truth. That Pastor Roger Williams is one of the great thinkers of the pulpit, great thinkers of life, great thinkers as a man. And I'm glad that he is here with us this evening. And I want Pastor Williams to know we can take our time. We ran a little over, so we're going to take our time tonight. Pastor Williams, it's good to have you on, sir.
Good to be here, Pastor Camp. Thank you so much. This is something I've been looking forward to. So happy to be with you tonight.
Man, glad to have you on, brother. Now, listen, throughout the course of February, I've seen so many people wear African attire. I mean, yeah. I can remember people laughing at me when I would wear it, and in certainly religious circles. Yeah. Now I see everybody that laughed at me is just wearing it. Right. And right. Which is fine with me. Is just that one should never laugh, particularly of our race, of people who are wearing it, because then you're really kind of laughing at the ancestry and the garments that were made. So here it is, Pastor Williams. Black History Month has passed. Yeah. Now what?
Black history has passed, and what we really need to do is learn our history. Let me clarify what I'm talking about. I really don't think, as we see Black history today, I really don't think we see a substantive engagement with history. And what I mean for us as African-American Christians, people of faith, embracing that history as a narrative of God's movement and his engagement with us to save us and redeem us. Now, this is just something for our listeners to think about. And if I'm wrong, I'll admit it. We're one of the few people who downplay, truncate, and even eliminate our history. Now, if I'm sitting with a brother who happens to be Italian, and he had his grandparents were the first to move to the States, you talk about the old country, and it's a time for me to listen and how his people came over and they established themselves, started a business, fought for the country in its wars, and it's lauded, it's lifted up of how they came to be. I'm not going to sit there and tell an Italian what to think about his history. When the Jews talk about their history, in it is the narrative of their survivability to overcome pogroms that were meant to eliminate them from the face of the earth. But then when it comes to us, we are encouraged by ourselves as well as the larger society to delete or at least mute our history. But woven throughout the fabric of our history is God's redemptive plan. And I think I know why, to some degree, Pastor Camp, why we're not affectionate when it comes to our history. Affectionate. It's because we have a troubling piece in our narrative. The tragedy of subjugation and slavery in America by one people to another. The people who were enslaved were a part of God's crowning glory in his creative work. And America does not know how to talk about that history, doesn't want to talk about it, because once we do, then the implications are enormous and probably threatening to the establishment of the country as we know it. And we have been asked, coerced into not talk about that history so we can get along with everybody. See, that's what we're supposed to do. So in wake of Black History Month, now let's really start learning some history. Let me add one other footnote. When Carter Woodson began Black History Week in 1926, this, and read the book, Miseducation of the Negro, and I think we talked about this on one of your previous shows. The Miseducation of the Negro highlighted accomplishments by Africans on the African continent. You didn't have Jackie Robinson breaking the color barrier yet. You didn't have Cassius Clay, AKA Muhammad Ali, or Muhammad Ali, AKA Cassius Clay, giving up his title for his religious beliefs and then coming back. You didn't have the first this, the first that. You had accomplishments by African people prior to the slave trade highlighting the creative powers of God in us. And we don't talk about that during Black History Month. We talk about, that's why you have such a frivolous, infantile response to African attire and other things, because people are disjointed and disconnected from that history. So when I talk about let's embrace and learn our history, let's really start getting substantive in our history, because that history has implications on how we talk about ourselves and the actions we take as people of faith.
And I remember as a child, it was Black History Week.
Yeah.
Or they called it Negro History Week.
Right.
When I was in school, starting in school in 1958, in terms of kindergarten, things of that nature. And you brought up something very significant of what Carter G. Woodson said. And I remember, and listen, don't get me wrong, Pastor Williams, people who wear African attire doesn't mean they're African-minded.
All right, yeah, no doubt.
And I remember saying to someone, maybe about 4 or 5 years ago, and they said, Merry Christmas. And I said, well, Merry Christmas and a Happy Kwanzaa. And they responded to me by saying, I don't do that. As black as 2 midnights. I don't do that. And I thought that was I thought that was very interesting.
That is very.
Then, of course, knowing the history of Christmas, and Kwanzaa is not an African thing, that it was developed here as it relates to first fruits and relating back to the homeland. So I think that whenever we look at February, I always refer to it as Black History Beyond the Month. Yeah. Black History Before the Month and Black History Beyond the Month. And I thought that you brought up some very important information as it relates to it. Now, here's the thing, Pastor Williams, allow me to segue. I've had a chance to tune in on you on Sunday mornings. Breakfast blessings.
Yes.
Give us your take on that as people continue to tune in.
Yeah, and I've been very thankful for those who have. What we're trying to do on Sunday morning is use the 8 o'clock hour. Well, really 8 to 8:30, 8:40. We try to keep it really short, where we're reaching out from the walls of our church with our teaching ministry. We want to build it. We are in talks and conversation about how we can build it and make it more equipped to meet the needs of the people that are engaging with us via Facebook Live, and just to sit and share and break the bread of life with people at the table. I'm sitting now where I do everything really virtually and live stream. And we sit at the table and we break the bread of life, breakfast blessing, simply to just share the word of God. And I don't get into pastoral issues for the most part, unless it's one of those general pieces that I know is understood and general in all of in all of our ways of walking according to our convictions. But it's to teach and inspire, but never to take the place of a pastor and someone who goes to a church or who attends a church. We're not trying to replace that pastor or anything like that. We're just trying to break the bread of life. And so far, it's been growing, Pastor Cam. I've been humbled by that and challenged in that, whenever souls come to the table, as you know, we are responsible to God for what we deposit in those souls. And so as people engage and turn in and tune in, we're humbly thankful, and we want to be challenged to do the best job to represent the kingdom.
I've been flipping back and forth on those Sundays, and between you and Gregory, our good friend, Dr. Gregory Stanislaus.
Oh my God.
I'll hear you, I'll hear him. And, of course, he's a friend of ours.
Yes.
Let me throw out a name here. Hakeem Jeffries.
Yes.
The congressman and, of course, the minority leader of the Democratic Party.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts, Pastor?
Man, I'm so proud of him. I see him as a brother who I believe is really rooted and grounded in his moral convictions. And while he is negotiating matters on a political plane, and that's challenging for anyone, regardless of how strong they are, how unique they are. When you're dealing with issues on a political plane, especially in Washington, D.C., you are up against it. There are issues that are being discussed in Washington that are being politicized. They're not being talked about as they should be, as issues should be. They're being politicized. Therefore, they're being talked about in such a way where it's the benefit of that party. I think Hakeem Jeffries will transcend and rise above that in his leadership. It's tough to do it. And it requires him to get people to come on board with him. And I think he's going to need our prayers. He's going to need our support. We got to let him know that we're behind him. But I do believe that the Democratic Party, in the position of the minority leader, have someone in Hakeem Jeffries who has a moral compass that's going to call upon him to be fair. I believe that's in him to do that. It's a part of his fiber and his fabric. Plus, one last thing I want to say about it, Pastor Camp. I know where he was as a kid every Sunday. When I heard him speak, I said, that brother was nowhere but in the Cornerstone Church, listening to Sandy Ray preach, because he got the cadence and the deliverance and everything, man. And I just sat there like, bro, you just need to go ahead on and go get But he's a brother beloved. I believe he's going to do a great job. I really do.
Now, you and I have talked about this subject, hip hop from a theological perspective.
Don't push me because I'm close to the edge. I'm trying not to lose my head. It's like a jungle sometimes. It makes me wonder how I keep from going under. It's like a jungle sometimes. It makes me wonder. You see, now, everybody who's listening to me do that, like, ooh, Lord, Reverend, oh. No. What I'm hearing and what I'm reciting for you are the narratives of Black people who were left to deal with the socio-political and economic strains and struggles without the relevant voice of the church. Yes, sir. And we talked about this on one of your other programs. And I'll talk with anyone who disagrees with me. The Black church did not provide the anchor. And it's not all the Black church's fault, but we have a role in not providing the anchor for these young people to have a mind about the issues that they talked about. If you listen carefully what they're talking about, and Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five, who I just recited for you, they were trying to give you a narrative and an understanding of their social space, their political drama, and their political disempowerment by the structures over time. And the Black church, where were we? I'll just raise the question. Where were we in the late 70s and early 80s on these things? Were we tired from the tragedy and the struggles of the 60s? Maybe. But we were not a vibrant voice, I think, as we should have been. And I'm a pastor of a church. I love the church. I'm the same. I have the same sentiment as someone, I can't remember the name of the individual who said it, but our friend, Dr. Gardner Calvin Taylor, recited it. The church is just like Noah's Ark. It may be a little stink on the inside, but it's the safest place around. So I have a lover's quarrel with the Black church. I have a lover's quarrel. We were not present. And coming out of that were young people that had something to say. And because they did not have a religious anchor, a religious ethic anchoring them, they talked about it in ways that were offensive to women, just overall in general offensive. And, NWA, we know what that stands for, emerged in the early 90s, but they emerged out of a context that was ever evolving throughout the late 70s and the 80s of police brutality. That's why they say F the police. The hip hop artists are the beautiful souls of our community that we should start, when we start talking about them, we should start with the context of love, God's love, that stretches the boundaries of our being comfortable with what we think is right and wrong, and listening and understanding rather than deciding whether to agree or disagree. Zoom in on understanding and saying, what are we talking about here? And what was the church not addressing, and what must the church address? I think the hip hop community teaches us a lot. And I think this is 50 years now. They're celebrating the evolution of hip hop.
Yeah, yes, sir.
And I can remember all of it almost, just a little bit of it at the beginning, I can't remember, but I certainly remember its evolution, especially into the commercial scene. But it's an art form that ought to be respected along with jazz. But it is entangled in a scenery and a setting that involved a lot of hurt and pain, a lot of breaking down of agencies that would speak for our young people. And in so doing, they talked about it the way they talked about it. For those of us who have we squirm at cursing when we hear it on a record, but we rather hear ourselves say it at home. Yeah, we just adopt the head that says, let's understand what's going on here, and ask the church, where were we in the making of all of this?
Now, Pastor, we already talked about the month of February and all of that. When you talked about hip hop, how effective with the arts is the arts in ministry itself? And of course, that entails not just music, but it also entails theater.
Yeah.
How effective can that be in our churches?
I would like to believe it can be very effective. I have a 19-year-old son, soon to be 20, who's an artist himself. Some of you have seen his artwork on Facebook. Me and his mother have bragged on him and posted it.
We have pictures of them too, by the way. That's going to pop up in a minute. We have pictures.
Yeah. Oh, okay. And you know what? I think it is very important because this goes back to the original piece that I tried to talk about earlier. That's my son. God bless him. Look at him.
Handsome guy.
Pastor Camp, I used to look like that. Anyway, listen, I think that this goes back to what we were talking about originally. Music, the arts are all avenues in which we find God in our history, in our narrative, in our present moment. The way we express ourselves in dance, in theater, in music, in our writings, from James Baldwin to Langston Hughes, from KRS-One to Drake, from some of our greatest minds, Audre Lorde. They represent God's work and his move and the specificity of yes, Black life in America moving toward redemption. So when we allow that to be expressed in our ministries, we're expressing what God has given us to be a witness to the world of his presence in Black life. And amplifies that word in Matthew 25, when you did not do it unto one of the least of these, you did not do it unto me. Yeah.
Wow. Now, Pastor Williams, what this generation has witnessed, and I would not say that like no other generation before. We've read about pandemics in the 1910s and the 1920s. So for us to be able to, for us to say that no generation has experienced it, but we did it in various ways. In this third year of the pandemic, how do you see ministry going forward compared to the year 2020?
Well, right now, I'm afraid I don't see it going forward in the sense of progressive strides to something new. Something, territory that has not been occupied before. It seems like everybody's just trying to get back to what they were doing before the pandemic, and to some degree we have to. But I guess I'll be honest with you. When we entered into the pandemic, I remember the last Sunday we were here, which was the third Sunday in March. So we're coming up on the anniversary of that. We shut down our church for a very long, extended period of time, and we were virtual. And with the help of others, yours truly, we were able to try to keep this work together. And I had some great committed people to help me do that. Around May, June of that year, and in the midst of all the horrible reports of deaths all around, some in our church, other churches, in our association, we kept hearing about guys and men that we stood shoulder to shoulder with, our colleagues, other women in ministry as well, dying, leaving us. Right in the midst of that, I began thinking, this is the opportunity that church needs to kind of launch into new dimensions and arenas that we haven't occupied before. And for the most part, unless someone has a corrective word for me, I haven't seen that. We just wanted to get right back to where we were in our comfort zones. I don't want to say we need another pandemic because I don't want to go through that, neither do you. But I think we lost out on the quiet time we needed to contemplate taking some risks and putting our foot in that Jordan River, crossing over. We, for the most part, I don't see that we did that. So I would hope, without having to go through another pandemic, we would reconsider the opportunity we had to move in a different way.
My guest tonight, Dr. Roger Williams, pastor of the First Baptist Church of Glen, Cove. I just want to let you all know that our guest Next week will be Bishop Victor Brown, pastor of the Mount Sinai United Christian Church in Staten Island. Bishop Victor Brown, who always has something very much in his head to discuss. So he will be our guest on next Wednesday. Now, let me ask you this, Pastor Williams, if you can, or compartmentalize, or from your own perspective, discuss Russia, Ukraine, and think about the billions of dollars, approximately $2 billion that will be sent to Ukraine, considering the economy here in the United States.
Yeah. Well, let me say sincerely what should be said and understood. All human life is valuable and matters. That's what Black Lives Matter was trying to say. We've been shown historically in this country that we don't matter, but our lives matter too. And so we know that all life matters. But America has a geopolitical agenda. And that agenda has to do with not letting its chief opponent, Russia, arguably it's China, to maneuver in such a way to where the Western world is threatened by the East. And that's the geopolitical agenda that they have. And so therefore, these billions of dollars are being poured into assisting Ukraine, and its leader coming to the Joint House of Congress and speaking, holding a very venerable position with us in doing so. And as a brother who know that I have connections to the mothership, Africa, I look at why we are not there trying to assist and plant resources for development and growth. And it's because the geopolitical agenda that America has does not encompass that. And Africa, so therefore Africa is not a part of the agenda. Do I believe there's a racist element here? Yes. My patience is getting very thin for people who want to try to erase race out of everything. This nation is built on it. The white-skinned nations that can draw the sympathy card, our country, especially when it allows for them to position themselves in a stronger way over its chief opponents, i.e. Russia, i.e. China. We'll pour those dollars in. We see the will to do that. The question becomes, yes, we have an economy presently that is suffering, but also at the same time, when it comes to devastation and people needing help outside of America, Africa has sustained that from this country. And over the decades, we have not addressed that in a substantive way. So it all points to the geopolitical agenda that this country has for its own survivability and what fits into the ethos of America.
And by touching on that, there's a fight for it.
Yeah.
Then there's a fight against about Black history being totally removed from schools on every level, just removed.
Yeah.
And how some African Americans think that, well, I'm not African, I'm an American. No one's saying that, but it's almost like disconnecting yourself from an umbilical cord that brought life into you.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on this fight to remove it altogether?
Sad, because the history is American history. Think about this, Pastor Camp. and I'm not saying it's easy for all Jews to do this, but we on the American stage can talk about the Holocaust because it didn't happen on American soil. And we could be sympathetic and stand with our Jewish brothers and sisters, as we should. Because, but it's more comfortable to do that because it didn't happen on American soil. But what did happen on American soil? Africans being brought here to be subjugated and dehumanized. In ancient history, we were lauded along with Native Americans, but the propaganda had to change in order to justify the brutality and the reducing of the human spirit to property, chattel. So when you put that history in school, you're teaching young white brothers and sisters that this really hadn't been a country about do your best, work hard, and great things will happen. It has to do really with, yes, work hard, do well, and that skin color of yours, white, will give you an avenue to success that is generally not available to those who do not have white skin. That's America's history. And that history is told when you talk about Black history in the classrooms. And we have to put it in our churches. We have to sponsor other programs where our young Black folks are encountering their history. But I still will say this, while I do believe Black folks are suffering much from not knowing their history, white people really need to learn Black history. They're really the ones who are suffering.
Yeah.
They really are. They're the ones who are suffering because they have an identity about themselves that does not fit history. And above that, history that they have an identity about themselves that does not fit God's plan. And so that's the fallout from eliminating it altogether. And I don't really see any redress on that. We're going to have to do our job of taking control of the narrative of ourselves in our churches and in our homes and tell our story as we always have.
We've seen the controversy of things that have taken place in our government, over the course of decades. And according to FBI Director Christopher Wray, he believes that COVID-19 was also an accident in Wuhan, China. Now, we've heard this argument before. When I first heard about COVID-19, it was first said it came from Europe.
Yeah.
Then it shifted to China. Now he's saying it was an accident that happened in Wuhan, China, as it relates to their labs. But I would also like to think that it's a possibility that it was not just Chinese people in the Chinese labs. So what are your thoughts on that?
Boy, I tell you, I'll be honest with you, sometimes I don't know what to believe. Pastor Camp, this is something I'm really wrestling with. What I will say is this: I think it should always be remembered that China is an active nation in trying to supersede America as a great world power. And we have to understand that. Now, I don't want to be the genesis here of conspiracy theories or anything like that, because I think that has been very harmful in the past, stating things that don't have any substance. But it is truthful that China wants to supersede America as a great world power. And we've helped them to get where they are now when it comes to how we've invested in what they do for us in providing products and services in this country. But what I think we have to take from it, knowing that this is a nation that wants to be a superpower, want to be great in the world, that the just like evil can exist in America, it can exist in any other nation. and so we have to keep our minds open that what we were prepared for, meaning the Obama administration made sure that infrastructure was in place to provide for this nation the opportunity to be inoculated from any disease or any life-threatening problem we were given this infrastructure to be inoculated from that. Mr. Trump came in and tore it down. Ebola, we will remember, didn't get past 5 people, if that many. Ebola, we had the infrastructure and we executed it, and it happened. People's lives were saved. But when the infrastructure was torn down by the Trump administration, you had now deaths over 1 million people in this country from something that would not have happened if that infrastructure, I believe that infrastructure was still in place. There's evil in this country in high places, but there's also evil in other nations in high places. And I'm still trying to figure out, why that line go that way and that line go that way. Who's on the end of that line and who's, I'm still trying to figure it out. And I think it's gonna come to light, but that's still a work in progress for me.
I want to say to this audience that music that was on earlier, we don't own the rights to that music, but it's made by a group called Yellowjackets, a jazz group, and the name of the song is called Revelation, which is, this is appropriate for Pastor Williams to be on here this evening as we look at Revelation. Now, Pastor, again, what books have you read and possibly are reading that you would recommend to this audience to add to their library?
Now, since I knew you were going to ask that question, I'm going to go to my library here on my iPad and not depend on my memory, because there's some things I would like people to read. I really would like people to read. And I may have mentioned these books before, so forgive me if I have. Christians Against Christianity by Aubrey Hendricks. Y'all just pick it up and read the introduction in chapter 1, and that will lead you to read the rest of the book. It is about the right-wing Christian nationalist evangelical movement, the political movement that is in this country, that is now being given voice by Marjorie Taylor Greene, Lauren Boebert, others who are in elected office trying to make America a Christian nation. And how the white supremacist instincts inform that movement. I think people ought to read that. I think I've mentioned to you before too a book called Jesus, the Village Psychiatrist.
Yes.
And it helps us to really address the issues of behind the healings of Jesus and the transposing of those issues onto our modern American problem with mental health, and how the church can participate in ministries that will help address in a substantive way the mental health of our patients. So I pray people will look at that book. It's called Jesus, the Village Psychiatrist by Donald Capps. And I believe you probably know that name. He's done some work at Princeton Theological Seminary. Howard Thurman's, any of Howard Thurman's works. One book, though, that I have been enjoying is the Sermons on the Parables.
Yes.
Howard Thurman is one of the great minds. I wish we talked about him more. I wish many of our younger pastors, 35 and younger, would know who he is and read some of his works. He had a quiet, subversive message, but it was shrouded and dressed in love, not love with dissimulation, but love, genuine God's love. And it was a quiet, subversive approach to breaking down all of the structures that divide that man has built on the premise of race. Howard Thurman's he's a great gift to the body of Christ. And I'm going to continue to tell people to read as a beginning piece, A Black Theology of Liberation by James Cone.
Yes, sir.
I just think you need to read that. You need some of that in you. Put that beside your grits and your eggs and your bacon. Yeah. Sip on a little bit of that and that'll help you out. Yeah.
My guest is from Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Same place where someone we've admired and who has ministered to us, Dr. Gardner Taylor.
Yes, sir.
Came from Baton Rouge. And I love to talk to Pastor Williams Pastor Williams, when you talked about those books, I have to throw this in here.
Yeah.
You preached for how many years now? You've been preaching for how many years? Just preaching.
Just preaching. Okay, I need a calculator.
Because I'm gonna say preaching and then pastoring. How many years you been preaching?
Okay, so here we go. Let me do this, Pastor Camp. I've been preaching. This is 2023, right?
Yes, sir.
I've been preaching since 1988.
My Lord.
That was the time I preached my first sermon. So that's how many, somebody around you can do the math. I've been pastoring since 1995. I took my first church at 25 years old. In 1995, I was turning 26 that year. 26, but somewhere in there, 1994, 1995. 1995.
Preaching for 35 years and pastoring since
1994,
okay.
1995. I've been here 24 years. I've been in First Baptist for 24 years this year.
Yeah, wow.
This June will make 24 years I was elected. And I was at the Magnolia Baptist Church in Baton Rouge, Louisiana for 3.5 years. One of my members just texted me 35 years. Yeah, I've been preaching for 35 years. You know, someone asked Dr. Taylor how long he had been preaching. And he said, I'm a little embarrassed to say how long I've been preaching because some people will think I need to be further along than I am now.
When I was a young man and I saw 2 rows of preachers and sat in front of me and they all looked so old, and I said to myself, why don't they just get out the way? And then as I got older, I realized I didn't want to get out of the way.
Right.
But I asked that question for a reason. How still important, and some people may think it's irrelevant, is mentoring and to be mentored?
Oh my God, it is essential. And you and I have talked over the phone. There's so much available to young people now that was not available to us, that can be bad, but also can be good. But to have reverence and respect for an older person in the ministry and to sit with them and to let them be a model for you as it were a preacher or a pastor, to watch and to see them do that work. I think it's most essential to a young man, young woman coming through in ministry. You cannot do this without someone going before you to model it for you, to speak to some of the issues that they've experienced already that you haven't even come close to experiencing yet, or not old enough to know how to maneuver through the complex matrix sometimes that is ministry. And I lament that I don't see that readily accepted by a lot of young preachers and a lot of young pastors. I would hope that would change. I hope that the gifts that I got, I call them gifts of wisdom and insight. Not everything was told to me of what to do and how to think, but what to do, but it shaped my thinking so that as I made decisions, they were very helpful for me. And you've spoken about Dr. Gardner Calvin Taylor, now my late pastor, the Reverend Dr. Jesse B. Bilberry. These men, they were great men and served. Dr. Charles T. Smith, who is now gone on to be with the Lord, who used to be the senior pastor for Shiloh Baptist Church in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And I remember him spending one full day with me. Wow. I was a young pastor at Magnolia Baptist Church. I hadn't been there a year yet, had started already going through some problems. I was 25 years old and I had some 70, 80-year-old deacons plucking me upside my head and trying to see how far they can go with me, you know? And I went, Dr. Smith, I said, Dr. Smith, I need some help. I'm trying to be the young man my grandmother and my grandmother and mother, my grandfather reared, but I got some other stuff in me that want to come out. You gotta help me manage it. And this man sat with me a whole day and gave me wisdom and insight that I can still remember now, and I still think about when I'm dealing with God's work here at the church. It's important. It's important. And if any young pastors hearing this tonight, lay hold of somebody who is not put together by public acclaim, somebody who's been doing the work without the spotlight and have the value in them of other people's lives as being valued and building and accomplishing. Somebody, and I'm not just saying somebody like a Larry Camp, you ought to look at somebody like a Gary Simpson. Those are some good starts for young pastors to look at and say, I want to learn from this man. I want to see what this gentleman has done and how he's gotten from here to there. And I think young pastors, when they get a little older, they'll appreciate that.
Yeah, yeah. Now, we heard you talk about hip hop, and I know Hakeem Jeffries just loves Notorious B.I.G. because he can't end a speech without saying, and if you don't know, now you know. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the fact that the Notorious B.I.G. was from Brooklyn, so that helps Congressman Jeffries.
Goes a long
way. A long way. Yeah. But that's another thing, Pastor Williams. I hear Christopher Wallace, let's call him by his birth name.
Yes.
His songs in commercials, promoting cars, sodas. Who gets that money? What estate does that go to? Does that go to the label? Does that go to his mother? Does that go to his children? When these guys were demonized, and I'm specifically talking about Tupac Shakur and Christopher Wallace, and how all of them are now used in commercials that promote their various products. You know what? How do you view that, Pastor? Because I think that's an interesting thing too. Because you have Notorious Christopher Wallace mural everywhere. You have it in barbershops. You have it at King's Plaza in Brooklyn. And all of a sudden, here was a guy that was demonized, and all of a sudden, it's used as a form of promoting other corporations.
Yeah, well, it's commercializing a voice that was hewn out of that rock of communities that were struggling, that were not given any resources from these companies that are now using his voice. If anything, these companies probably directly or at least indirectly added to the stress and strains on the communities out of which Christopher Wallace came, Tupac Shakur came. And so now they benefited from it because they know there's a clientele out there that respects him, is moved by him, and then as it is with all people who die, they get lifted into a certain level of celestial glory. And I'm not saying that Christopher Wallace doesn't deserve the respect that he gets as perhaps the most influential of his time, if not of his time, certainly at least of his time, if not of all time. And you could have a debate with people about that, but he articulated in his lyrics the circumstances around, I know we heard him talking about the women, and we heard him talking about the drugs, and we heard him talking about other things and shooting and killing, but all of that was a part of what was around him, what he grew up under. Yeah. And now those companies are benefiting by putting his voice in these songs, these commercials, so as to bring that clientele that respect it. But is that money going, that the money that's being made, is it going back into the communities to make sure that another Christopher Wallace does not have to turn into Biggie Smalls?
Mm.
And I don't believe that it is, unless somebody has some information that I don't have. It's not, is his mother getting it? Are his kids getting it? Are kids like him benefiting from it? Once again, so that little young Christopher Wallace that's out there now trying to get an education in Brooklyn does not have to turn into a Biggie Smalls. I would hope somebody would address that and ask that question out loud. But once again, that's the way capitalism in America works.
One of the lyrics for Christopher Wallace: "I'm trying to make this paper so my daughter don't need no man."
That's right.
I remember that very clearly.
Right, and see, he's not talking about that the way somebody who's white and in suburbia America is talking about that. He's talking about that based on what he's seen in his community, the breakdown of his community systemically and structurally. He knows hustlers because he's a hustler. He had to be a hustler. So he don't want some hustler getting his hands on his daughter. I need her to be independent from all these hustlers because I know them. I run with them. I've had to run from them and run with them. So I'm trying to shape her life so she won't have to put her life, because no one has, I'm putting a lot of words in Biggie's mouth, but I don't think I'm off base too much. No one has stood up and structurally talked about how to resolve these problems in my community. You think people like him wanted to live, or his daughter to live like they had to live and the way others around them live? No, and nobody addressed it, but he was the voice of what it was. And that's where he's coming from when he puts that lyric out. I don't want my daughter dealing with no hustler to make it, I'm a hustler. My boy back here a hustler. We did what we had to do.
And the fact that Christopher Wallace and Tupac Shakur are a really big extension of Bob Marley. Just listening to Bob Marley's lyrics, a great extension. I call it prophecy beyond the sanctuary, prophetic words beyond the sanctuary in a real sense, by speaking to the matters at hand. And then, of course, we know that Bob Marley was killed by cancer, but there are those in Jamaica who speculate that it was more than that. So even after you've talked about hip hop, what other genres of music that inspire you, or just for the sake of calmness, even in your quiet time or study?
Yeah, I do listen to my gospel music, and I listen to gospel artists who do inspirational music. And I pause there for a moment, because a lot of this stuff is not gospel, but it's inspirational, and I can love on it for what it is. I never really caught on to contemporary jazz, and I was so happy I saw you post something with Thelonious Monk, and I said, wow, thank God for Pastor Camp. I don't even really know if anybody thinks of Thelonious Monk, the jazz pianist with the spade fingers.
Yeah.
And I know everybody, Coltrane and others, their names are known more. I could never hold on to contemporary jazz, but I really have enjoyed sometimes just in my reading, when I want to block everything off and just listen to Thelonious Monk do his work and put it down on the keys, if you will. That kind of jazz, the classical jazz pieces. And like I said, my gospel music, I listen to it. Some things I know that are not gospel, it's inspirational. They all work for me. And I'm going to say this too, and I'm going to challenge your audience here tonight. Why do we, and I'm asking the audience a question, why do we put up this European-made dichotomy between secular and sacred? At that age, that we didn't come up with that.
Mm.
That's European in nature. So I thank God for my mother who gave me Al Green. Let's get married today. Let's get married. Oh, might as well. Yeah, you know. And Teddy Pendergrass, who was my mother's unsanctioned husband. Turn out the lights. Yeah. R&B music put forth by Black folks have a soul to it that is connected to the church. Let's stop pretending that, you know, we don't see that. That you know, there's the brick and mortar of the club and there's the brick and mortar of the church. And the only difference is that when we come into the church, it's a sanctified space for the worship to our God. But that music was spiritual. It stretched beyond the walls and it took on a different form with different shoes on and different shirts and ties on when it got to the club. And Al Green, Teddy Pendergrass, the Temptations, I'll still go back and put those on. I remember just recently being reminded of a song Marvin Gaye put out in 1977, and it was actually as a result of his divorce settlement with his wife. I don't know if you remember this, but in 1977, as a part of his divorce settlement, he put out an album, Here, My Dear.
Yes.
I remember singing, this is what you wanted, so I've conceded. A lot of truth to it, baby.
Barry Gordy's sister. Yeah.
Barry Gordy's sister, that's right.
Yeah.
And you can hear the emotion and you can hear, listen, the spirituality of Marvin Gaye in that. We have been taught in the West, spirituality has nothing to do with any of that. Marvin Gaye teaches us just as much spirituality as anybody else singing the Gospels. And we know it in what's going on. We know it in Inner City Blues, but it was right there in Here, My Dear. And when he sings too, because I remember leaning on that song when I was going through my divorce. This is what you wanted, so I've conceded.
I conceded.
And then met a little girl. Sure was fine, sure was fine. Pretty little thing, just about blew my mind. Doom, doom. You know, listen, man, that's spiritual. It's about love. It's about the heart of a man or a woman under the attack of adversity while in love. That's spiritual.
Yeah.
And I hope our audience will come to appreciate that all of these artists, obviously, no one should transcend the person of God and the person of Jesus that was sent to us to represent God. And our first fruits ought to always be with the praise of our lips to our God. But these other people too share a part of our spiritual heritage and narrative that we ought to embrace and stop being ashamed of it.
I can still see that scene in The Color Purple where Suge Knight with her band, they're down by the lake.
Yeah.
Playing their music.
Yeah.
The father's a pastor in the church.
Yeah.
And the choir singing, "Oh Lord, speak to me." So
yeah,
they're playing one song. Suge Knight stops Lawrence Fishburne, just looks at him, and they all march into the church. Suddenly, as they bust into the church, it's a combination of the blues and the gospels together, which is such a powerful scene. So you really brought that relevancy to it. I must say this, I must confess to you, Pastor Williams, when I first heard Chris Stapleton at the Super Bowl, I had never heard him before, when he was singing with Stevie Wonder. I downloaded every song afterwards, and there were two songs, all of his songs were good, but one song, he says in his album, my father doesn't pray any longer.
Wow.
Talked about in another song what he was going through. He says, I don't need to preach it at this time. Wow. Chris Stapleton is somebody who people need to listen. I mean, every song. He talks about whiskey, but he talks why he's drinking whiskey.
Yeah.
He talks about, but this, and he's from Memphis, Tennessee, and he's white, y'all. He is, but his songs are just so coming from one of the Bible belts, of course, of the South and Tennessee. So I want to thank you for
for people who didn't see the Super Bowl, I'll just add this, Pastor Camp. For people who didn't see the Super Bowl, his appearance will throw you off. He has an appearance that would make you categorize him as middle America, white boy, blah, blah, blah. But when you listen to him sing, brother, I heard the blue note in his voice, the blue note that is connected to jazz and blues.
Yes.
I was like, who is that guy? I remember, it was like, and then later to find out he was a Black Lives Matter sympathizer. So
I didn't know that. I
was like, okay. And then when I heard that, I was like, okay, all right.
That's why Stevie brought him on that stage.
Yeah. Oh my God. Because when his voice and when he hit that blue note, I was like, who is this guy? This guy, he got he drank another glass of water.
Thank you, Pastor. Let me just say before we go off, of course, when we go off, you're gonna hear a song that's a minute and I think 31 seconds. I forget the count now. I've been off for a couple of weeks, called Kashana, which of course is in the Swahili land by Hugh Masekela, which means God's gift, because that's exactly what you've been to us tonight. Now, before we go, Pastor, give us parting words that you think we need to hear, whether they're encouraging, whether they're inspirational, or whether they're necessary, or all of them together.
Well, I want to acknowledge first that this is the first day of Women's History Month. And when I see that, I know that the first need that we have is to really highlight the grand and glorious accomplishments of our Black women who've been our supporters, who've challenged us, who have gone it along on the strength of the love of their children. And when there was no male to lead, they went out there and did their job to lead, to make the voice of freedom known to the larger world. So I just want to say a salute to all of the Black women, this Women's History Month, to all the Black women, and certainly our white sisters too. I'm not throwing any shade on them. I just know that our Black sisters just don't get the kind of attention for what they've done for the betterment of the Black community as they should. I also want to say this, and God knows my heart when I stop to say this. Just before Women's History Month came into being, we all got the grand news that the offspring of Larry Camp and Lorraine Camp, Asia Camp, is going to preach her first sermon real soon.
It's Niger, actually.
Niger. I said Asia. I know I said Niger. Yes, Niger. I'm sorry, Niger. Don't be mad at me, Niger. Niger Camp is going to preach her first sermon. And I have to take some time and say this. I've been able to see her prior to this announcement, the committed servant she's been to the Bethlehem Nation, to you as her father and her pastor. She is a sister that I know she hasn't preached the first sermon yet and hasn't been able to move into the dimension yet, but I know she's going to do great things for the kingdom. And I want to take a little moment to encourage her and to let her know that we love her and support her. And the First Baptist membership going to be right there cheering her on as she goes forward. And kudos to you and to Reverend Lorraine Camp for the job that you all have done at Bethlehem Nation and with your children. And I do think it's worthy that I take time just to share that information with everybody tonight. Very thankful for you, Pastor Camp, not only for being on here tonight, but for the work you're doing, for the fruit that is hanging from your limbs. And fruit is always enjoyed by others, not the tree itself. And you definitely provided fruit for people to enjoy. And think about it, is going to get better, and we're going to get a healthier rating in our shares. And hopefully one day we're going to challenge. We're going to. This is an ongoing joke between us. We're going to challenge Insight as the #1 talk show. I doubt it, but we're going to try.
That reminds me of that time where Kobe Bryant went down court and Michael Jordan was trying to defend him. Kobe put the ball in. And then at some point, Jordan was breathing like this. Then he told Pippen, let's switch off.
No, you know what? I feel like that 1998 All-Star game.
Yes, sir.
Kobe said, I got Michael. I got Michael. Look, I got Pastor Camp. But Michael came down there and did that turnaround jump on him. And when Kobe turned around and looked at it, went through, Michael Jordan was at half court getting ready to go back in the And Kobe had to go up to him and say, now, can you tell me a little bit about that turnaround jumper? Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed.
Brother Pastor, thank you once again. Please lead us out in a word of prayer. Don't forget, brothers and sisters, to see Think About It comes on Tuesdays. Am I correct, Pastor? Or Monday?
No, Monday nights at 7.
Monday nights at 7. Please tune in to Think About It, as Think About It has some wonderful dialogue between Pastor Williams and his guests. So please tune in on that.
Thank you.
Pastor Williams, just lead us out in the word of prayer.
Okay, sure will. Lord, I thank you tonight for the moment we've been given to talk together and hopefully inspire minds to think and to gather insight on the matters that matter to us, the issues that matter to us. We are challenged on every side, but Lord, we thank you for your amazing grace. We thank you for the bread of heaven that comes down to nurture us and feed us. And Lord, we thank you for Pastor Camp and this platform, this space that he's provided for minds to engage and to share and to reflect. We pray blessings upon him, his wife, his family, and his great church, the Bethlehem Nation. It is in Jesus' name we pray. Amen and amen.
God bless you, my friend, and God bless you, brothers and sisters. See you next Wednesday as we interview Bishop Victor Brown of the Mount Sinai United Christian Church in Staten Island. And be safe for the rest of the week. And as we depart with this song by Hugh Masekela, Kashana, because Pastor Williams has been God's gift to us. Good night, and see you next week.
Bless you. Bless you.